Hey, good morning. It's Diana Opong.
And Kristen Leong. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now.
The causes of June's deadly heat wave are still being studied, but the early thinking is the usually mild Pacific Northwest can expect more blistering heat and more often. Today, we'll hear from a climate scientist about how cities like Seattle can adapt. But first, let's get you caught up.
Get ready to be carded twice the next time you want to hit the bars. The Seattle Times says that at least 60 spots are now requiring proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test before you can sit indoors. Vaccinations are leveling off, and state officials are asking everybody to mask up as the Delta variant is driving a fifth wave of infections. But so far, that's just a recommendation. So bars and restaurants are taking a stand to keep employees safe and keep their doors open.
The outside investigation into allegations of racism at Seattle Children's is complete, but some of the people involved want the hospital to say more about what it found. Children's leadership said in a letter Friday that the 6-month review, led by former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, was finished and that they agreed to all of its recommendations. But people who oversaw the review, including former Governor Gary Locke, want the hospital to make the entire report public, which so far it hasn't done.
And if you smelled smoke a time or two over the weekend, you're not alone. The National Weather Service says it blew in from Northern California wildfires on the jet stream. That means we could be in for hazy skies the first part of this week. The good news is the smoke's staying up high, and so far it hasn't affected our air quality.
And now, Patricia Murphy.
I have to admit, when the temperature in my house hit 87 this week, I got just a little nervous. I mean, a month ago, we were peaking at 108 degrees. That's not just oppressively hot, that's dangerously hot. And my neighborhood stayed cooler than some others around the city. Our colleague Joshua McNichols went out to 2 neighborhoods to find out how people experienced June's historic heat.
I'm standing on the south face of Beacon Hill. I came here because it's a hot neighborhood. During past heat waves, it's been one of the hottest places in Seattle. It's right across the freeway from all the asphalt of Boeing Field, and there's not a lot of trees here, so it gets really hot. Were you working on that day?
I sure was. Yeah, and
I started with a mail carrier, a guy named Emmanuel Easter.
It was like 8 hours of walking. I could only make it to about 6 of them before I came back. It was extremely hot, and the only way that I can really keep cool was a hat on my head and a towel within that to shelter the back of my neck.
Like a wet towel?
Like a wet towel, yes. Yeah, no, it started out okay. I started getting chills later on in the day.
You started getting chills. Is that a sign of overheating?
Yeah, that's a sign of heat stroke. That's starting to form, yes. The sun won that day.
One of the most alarming stories I heard in that neighborhood was from Leonora Monsalves.
I'm from the Philippines.
From the Philippines?
Yes.
She's 85 years old and had nothing to cool her down but a couple electric fans. How hot did it get in your house?
I think 112 or 115.
Inside your house?
Yes, very, very hot.
Oh.
I got sick the whole day. I did not wake up. I just in the bed.
North Seattle also had plenty of hot spots, if past heat waves are any indication. But people there told me they found ways of coping. Sasha and Carl Wells spent their days and their nights in the water.
We swim in Green Lake at night.
I thought it was really refreshing, and then whenever we got out, we were definitely cold. Yeah, because the sun was down and it was cooling off.
There was another couple swimming in Green Lake, and it was fabulous. It was like we were there till almost midnight.
Melissa Turman told me that her Green Lake Craftsman home has no AC, and it got up to 98 degrees inside. So her family swam in the lake, and they slept in the basement. And
what else did we do? We went to the movies. We went out to dinner where there was air conditioning.
I was just about to wrap things up in Green Lake when I met Trey. He lives in Green Lake now with air conditioning, so the heat wave didn't bother him. But he grew up in South Seattle. You were describing a difference that you saw between what happened in the south part of Seattle and what happened here. Can you...
Well, that just deals with, money and affluence. And this is Green Lake. Like, you have resources enough to go whatever you need. You can go check. I know some folks that could have went and checked into a hotel with AC. You know what I'm saying? Affluence versus non-affluence.
And in the end, wealth could be just as big a factor in how people experience the heat wave as any local variations in the weather itself.
KUOW's Joshua McNichols reporting there. Vivek Shandas is here. He's a professor at Portland State University, and Vivek studies how cities can better deal with heat and climate change. Thanks a lot for joining us, Vivek. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot of what we heard about in Joshua's reporting are things you have studied extensively. For one, the effect of asphalt and trees on temperatures. And you have made the case for years that these kinds of things are becoming critical for city planners to consider. And this heat dome really felt like a brutal reminder of just how dangerous that can become.
Yes, it is a reminder. And the tricky part that I'm thinking about now is how sticky these experiences are in our memory. We tend to move from one thing to another really quickly, though we have to keep in mind that this was arguably the first set of climate-related deaths that happened in the region. And we essentially knew who was going to suffer the most during and potentially die as a result of this heat dome that came through.
One of the things that we didn't learn until after the fact was that Seattle really didn't have a plan for this kind of heat. And this, maybe 5 years ago would have been surprising because we were generally a cooler part of the country. We enjoyed our temperate climate, but that has not been the case. And I'm curious what you think about that, what cities should be thinking about now.
Yeah, it's interesting when I just think back. The most infamous of heat waves was in the U.S. was the 1995 heat wave that hit Chicago and almost killed 1,000 people. Here we are in the Pacific Northwest, decades later, and we're having the same conversation here. Though the stories we were just hearing about the community members having to kind of figure out on their own, what is it that I can do? Well, I can go jump in Green Lake because I live near it, or I can turn on my AC, or I can go to the movies. Like these kind of you're on your own kind of situations are really why we get ourselves into much of the challenge during an extreme event like a heat wave. And so what I'd love to see is a way for community members to know and to have a set of options that are communicated well, that are understood, that really allow, particularly those that have potential vulnerabilities to heat, like the 85-year-old person that we just heard about an apartment that was 115 degrees hot. Like, what are the options that community members have, and how do we communicate those effectively across a large region like the Seattle metro region?
And of course, one of the easiest ways is to check on your neighbors, right, Vivek? Give them a call, ask them what they need, see how they're doing.
Right. That social connectivity, that ability to really know whether there are community members in your neighborhood that might be having a little bit of a difficult time during a heat wave, may not even wake up the next day given their apartment is 120 degrees. Like, this is the kind of society I think we really need to be thinking about nurturing if we're going to become more resilient to these increasing frequency and intensity of heat.
There are cranes all over this city. Construction is happening. Housing is being built. What can cities like Seattle do to try to be better planners for the future of our climate?
So cities are really built around a system of growth, and the idea of new development happening is what spurs the GDP. So we're having a really big conversation right now that these kinds of questions that we're asking, these are the most fundamental questions we need to be asking ourselves. And so if we're having that question of cranes around Seattle pushing growth, are we growing in a way that would allow these buildings to be more climate friendly? And are they more heat friendly? We're putting materials together that actually absorb the sun's solar radiation and re-emit it back out, amplifying temperatures in neighborhoods as we're continuing in this rapid growth process that a lot of cities have been captivated by. And as a result, we're really starting to see temperatures increase in terms of their differences from one neighborhood to another as a result of a lot of this growth. So we need to really be asking ourselves this fundamental question around how do we think about the ways in which we design our cities, not only geometry, not only coloring of materials, not only the materials themselves that we're using, but also the configuration of multiple buildings together in a neighborhood. There are old designs where communities have lived in very hot places. Humans have been able to live in the Middle East where temperatures are sometimes 115, 120 without air conditioning for millennia. Those are the lessons I hope we're still paying attention to and listening to, because we've done this before as a species, and I think we can do this again going forward.
You know, you say your message isn't completely resonating yet. You know, we have short memories, and I wonder what it's going to take and where the pressure has to come from.
I think part of the challenge is that, you know, we have nobody right now that has a specific agenda for heat. And so what we really need to be thinking about is, who are the offices? What are the municipal agencies and entities that can shoulder a little bit more of the weight of climate? And can we think about a chief heat officer, as Miami recently created? Can we think about a bureau that focuses specifically on climate change at the municipal level? Like, these are the kinds of things that we really need to be having as just a first step even out into understanding the immensity of the issue we're trying to tackle right now.
Vivek, you're in Portland. I'm here in Seattle, both of us experiencing this heat dome intensely. Where are you going to focus your efforts over the next few months?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think where this heat dome really brought me intellectually is into a space I wasn't expecting, but I feel like I really appreciated hearing the stories, even in this story, about the individuals and their coping capacities. Yes, there's the bigger science and the bigger research questions that are going. These stories, these narratives about how people are navigating extreme events, I feel like that's really an area that we haven't quite given as much attention to or appreciated as a general public. And while we all struggle day-to-day lives, climate is only amplifying some of those struggles. And so really want to bring some light to the way in which people are coping. What are their mechanisms for resilience? And what do they lean back on? What are the things that they really find to be helpful during extreme heat? And maybe through that, policymakers, decision makers can come up with strategies through a community-informed conversation about ways to mitigate and reduce the highly preventable deaths that we see from heat waves.
Vivek Shandas is a professor at Portland State University who studies how cities can better deal with heat and climate change. Really great to talk to you. Thank you very much for your research.
Thank you for having me. Wonderful to have this conversation, and I hope people are listening.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show today. If you want more Seattle Now, follow us on Instagram. We're at Seattle Now Pod.
It's a pretty great Instagram account, I think.
I love it.
Caroline Chamberlain Gomez produced today's show. Thanks to Joshua McNichols for his story. Our production team is Clare McGrane, Jenny Cecil-Moore, Matt Martin, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Diana Opong.
And I'm Kristen Leong. See you tomorrow.